Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. It is August 21st, 2023, the year I call 7, and I'm back with soul strengthening sessions. In fact, we are getting into what I'm calling the recovery series. Recovery from everything, because we're all battling and we're all going through a lot right now. I'm in the warfare. I know you guys are too, and I am deciding not to surrender to the pressure. So I'm starting with anxiety, because anxiety is definitely something that we've all wrestled with or battled in some form or fashion. Some of us are deep in the trenches, and I was going through some notes from last year, and I realized I teach on anxiety at least once a year in its purest form. And certainly in other teachings, I touch on anxiety because it's just something that we wrestle with all the time. So today, that is what this is going to be about, is anxiety. Now, I want to preface by saying that if you are someone who wrestles with anxiety, remember to be patient with yourself in your process, because we're all in different stages of healing and recovery. And the easiest way to help yourself along is to be patient with your own process. And a side note I would say is, once you learn your root traumas and issues, and you begin to learn and discover how to heal, and then you can share with those closest to you on what your triggers are, so that they can learn how to kindly and gently love you through them. And this is another encouragement, because it's very important that we remember that we are all in recovery, all of us, from something. The more informed we are of our own trauma and our own issues, the better we can inform those closest to us and those around us, so that we can all heal, because that is what we hope for, is to be whole in this life. So I wanted to preface with that, to remember, kind reminder to myself and to all of us, be gentle with those that you love and those around you, because they are in recovery from something. So, kicking off our recovery series, anxiety. As I said, I began teaching on anxiety probably about 3-4 years ago. And I subconsciously realized that I'm actually teaching this once a year in its purest form. But it doesn't hurt to be reminded, some of which, like I said, is the meat of what each teaching is. So I'm going to share that. And then the rest is just going to be as I feel led. Some of it's going to be what I'm dealing with, what I'm going through, so I can share based on my experience and live testimony, which I typically do when I do my teachings. That's just how I share and how I flow. I'm usually going through something in the moment, and I can share from that space. So, anxiety. I'm going to give you a definition that when I was studying this for myself and trying to understand the roots of my anxiety and my trauma and my issues, I received this revelatory knowledge definition of anxiety, and it really just helped me understand everything as it pertains to what is commonly diagnosed as anxiety and depression. Typically, if you're somebody who suffers with anxiety, and you go see someone at the doctor's office, or a psychiatrist, psychologist, counselor, and they diagnose you with anxiety, they will also say that you have depression. If you're somebody who takes medication, they will give you medication for both, okay? What I'm going to share is the root of where this comes from. And I'm going to show the connection between anxiety and depression, because they are related and they are connected, but it's a little bit different than what you might know. And here it is. Anxiety is the pendulum that takes you to the heights of anger or the depths of depression. When I was given this understanding, I literally saw the pendulum of a clock, okay? Which is interesting, and that's probably a hidden side note there. But the heights of anger and the depths of depression. So as we know, and I've shared this and taught on this, and I will always teach and on this specifically, because it helps us understand that there are stages to our emotional well-being when we are in a heightened state of emotions. So depression is a state that is rooted in sadness, and anger is another state. However, depression is not the first stage of sadness. It actually comes later. Anger, however, is the initial state that leads to other states connected to the root of anger. So when I got this revelatory knowledge of understanding, I understood this, that I'm actually wrestling with two states of emotion when it comes to anxiety. Okay? So what is anxiety? Generally speaking, it is something that causes us to come out of a state of peace. Okay? And I'm going to get into the roots of all of this. But anxiety is an alarm system that tells me something is wrong. Okay? Now, there are different triggers to our anxiety, and I'm going to get into all of this in just a minute. But what I want to start with is understanding this, that anger and depression are the two extremes of what I can expect when I'm feeling anxious. In other words, I tend to go one way or another when I get anxious. Okay? So, and this is very interesting because you already know, as I'm sharing this, where you tend to go when you feel anxious, because we all go somewhere. Okay? Some of us internalize our anxiety. Okay? That is to say, when I feel anxious, and I don't yet know how to deal with this, or even if I do know how to deal with this, I still tend to turn inward and isolate and keep it to myself so that I don't bother anybody. The problem is anxiety needs to go somewhere, okay, because it's energy. But if I'm the type of person that I internalize my anxiety, it causes sadness, which turns into depression. Okay? This is so important to understand. And this is going to set you free because you probably already know. But if you don't, this is life-changing to understand when I get anxious, what do I normally react like, or what do I normally respond with? Do I respond with sadness and feeling depressed? Now again, it's a stage, so I can be anxious about something for a long time and then it turns into a depressive state. Or am I the type of person that when I get anxious, I project my anxiety on other people outwardly, and I get angry and I get frustrated and I take it out on people? It's not uncommon to vacillate between the two, but typically you will have a natural anxiety response to feeling the anxiety. Okay? So again, anxiety is the pendulum that takes you to the heights of anger or the depths of depression. And the reason there's these directions is because anger is loud and overwhelming, and depression is not. It is the opposite. It is quiet, and it is it's like a black hole that sucks you in. Okay? So, before we go further, where do you tend to gravitate to? Do you tend to internalize your anxiety, or do you tend to project it out to other people? Both have remedy, both have hope, but knowing yours is the starting point. So in our inner being, as I always teach, we are spirit, soul, and body. And in our soul realm is our heart. This is where we process our emotional life. Okay? This is where anxiety attacks us. It attacks us in the heart. Okay? There's a verse in scripture that says, it's Proverbs 12:25. It says, anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word cheers him up. Okay, and I'm going to share this now because I'm going to come back to it in a little bit. But this is a clear spiritual perspective of the truth that anxiety does and can cause depression. It can cause you to feel weighed down if you don't know how to recognize it, and certainly if you don't know how to process it and deal with it. So we're going to get into this now. Our heart is where we process our emotional life. So when I feel the stress of life coming on me, I'm going to feel it obviously mentally first, because as I shared before, the soul has its natural rhythm of thoughts, emotions, and decisions. So I will naturally feel the stress and weight of the cares of my life, what's going on personally, what's going on with work, what's going on with whatever aspect and area of your life that seems to be too much and overwhelming. It's going to weigh on my thought life first. And if I don't handle it mentally first, then it pours into my emotional state. And this is where we're talking about. That anxiety tends to, in a sense, explode in its fullness in the emotional realm of our soul. This is why when it gets to the point where I start feeling anxious, and typically when we understand anxiety, we do tend to relate it to feeling, and this is why, because this is where it rests. So when I feel anxious, I tend to internalize my anxiety most of the time. There are times that I don't, that I get frustrated and upset and I project it, but I tend to typically stay in the state of keeping it to myself, unless of course I share it with the Lord in prayer and try and cast that anxiety onto Him so I can be released. Obviously channeling it through art and movement, for me specifically, and music is a way to release it, which is something I'm going to get into as well, and is what I teach. But the thing to remember is that you need to know your natural default with anxiety so that you can know your specific exit to get out of it. Okay, so here's another verse, Proverbs 4:23. Out of the heart flow the issues of life. And that's actually part of the verse. The first part says to guard your heart with all vigilance. I have a teaching on this, but essentially to guard my heart is to say I'm protecting my heart from anything that would cause a disruption of my natural state of peace. Which, by the way, this is how God created us to function, is in a state of peace. So as we know, anxiety is a state of unrest. So when I'm in anxiety, I'm already out of peace. And my longing, my innate longing is I need to find that peace again because this is not right. So the condition of our heart is dependent on the condition of our spirit. Now I share this a lot, but our soul, again, where our heart is, it needs an anchor so that it can get out of the pit of depression, so that it can get out of the chaotic state of anger. I need something to pull me out, and that is my spirit. So if my spirit is weak and malnourished, I don't have a lot of rescue to pull me out, which is why a lot of us stay in a perpetual state of anxiety, because we don't know how to get out of it. It's almost like I'm on autopilot. This is just how I've been doing this. But I'm here to share with you that there is ways to get out of it, and there's certainly ways to manage it and cope. And hopefully today you will leave with some of those. Let's see. Anxiety comes from, okay, we're going to get into the roots now because it's not just random that we feel anxious. There is a root cause to anxiety, because at the core, anxiety is spiritual. And it comes from the spirit of fear, which is an actual real spirit that harasses humanity all the time. So there is this understanding that there is a spiritual battle that I'm always up against because of living in this broken world, as I've shared many times. So when I keep that in mind, that I feel anxious because something is making me feel afraid, something is making me feel uneasy, then I can learn how to troubleshoot, well, what is it that's making me feel like this? A lot of times, it's hard to figure it out. And again, I'm going to go back to this understanding that some of us are thinkers and some of us are feelers. So some of the time I may feel anxious and I have a feeling about something, but I can't put my finger on it. I'm not sure. I just feel an oppressive state or oppressive spirit, or I might feel just unrest in my emotions or unrest in my thoughts because, again, 3 realms. So the spiritual realm, the inner realm of self, because of what I'm learning to release and what I'm battling, what I'm going through, and then the process of letting go. Because when you're letting go of the issues that are causing the anxiety, you're going to feel anxious. Okay? So knowing where you are is so vital. Now, again, I'm going to repeat this and actually finish it because I didn't get into it. I interrupted myself, as I often do. Anxiety comes from the spirit of fear to throw us off balance from the harmony of spirit, soul, and body. Again, we're created to function in perfect peace. This is why we're always seeking it. This is why we're always running away from anything that makes us feel like my peace is being taken from me. And here's where it's important to, again, distinguish, okay, am I feeling anxious because I have an actual threat in front of me from the outside? Because here's another thing to remember is is my anxiety coming from the outside or is it coming from within me? And again, within me means two aspects of this. Within me, that there's something that's still unhealed, that I'm being triggered and it just keeps flaring up and I don't have a grip on it and I don't know how to deal with it. It just happens to me like it's autopilot. Or within me as in, I know what it is, but I'm still learning how to let it go. Okay? Two very different processes, but it's the same caliber of importance, because my inner being is my responsibility to care for. And this is why I do what I do, because I want to empower you to know how to do this for yourself. Now, it's not easy. It's not, because we are constantly bombarded from the outside. We are constantly bombarded with fear. And there's so many layers to this. And within, we are constantly healing and growing. So the key here is to, again, acknowledge, who am I? Am I the type of person that internalizes anxiety when I feel it within or when I feel it without? Or am I the type of person that projects it? Either way, I need to learn how to manage it. Firstly, I need to recognize that I have an issue with it, and then I need to recognize that I need to learn how to manage it. And once I can manage it, then I can learn how to go through it and begin to release it, which again is a whole other process. There are I feel like I have to repeat this, so I'm going to say it again. Anxiety comes from the spirit of fear to throw us off balance from the harmony of spirit, soul, and body. Okay, so anxiety attacks my heart, which is the central nervous system of self. So if my heart is off balance, the rest of me is going to be off balance. And this goes spiritually, emotionally, and physically. In fact, if you're in a prolonged state of anxiety because of trauma, or because you just haven't learned how to manage it and release it, because you have to release it, and we're going to get into this, but it's going to affect you physically. You will have physical manifestations of the anxiety. Chief among them is heart issues. This is why we have panic attacks. This is why we have heart palpitations, which I've suffered from, and many of us have, because we have not released it from self. So it gets trapped and it gets stored in the body, and the body begins to give us those warning signs that I'm hurting, something's off. And of course, if we really don't take care of it and it turns into a state of being, this is why people have cardiac arrest and heart attacks, because they carry and internalize that anxiety to the point that it consumes their physical bodies. And we don't want to be here. We don't want to get to that point. We want to learn how to manage our own anxiety. Okay? So again, anxiety attacks the heart, the mental emotional connection. Okay, so that's my mind to my heart, what I think, what I feel. It attacks this connection. Okay, so there's division that's coming here when I feel anxious. The spiritual mental connection, which is my spirit to my mind. And we do have a spiritual part of the mind, so that's important to remember. And then the physical emotional connection, which I just described. That is how I feel affects how I feel physically. Anxiety manifests in our physical bodies, causing unrest and dysfunction. So this is what I was just talking about. In the state of homeostasis, which is the baseline like health that we're supposed to have. And the central nervous system, and as I said, examples are panic attacks, um, headaches, stomach issues, vertigo, fatigue. I mean, it's your guess is as good as mine how anxiety is going to affect you physically. Some of that is hereditary, which is basically what my parents or family lineage went through because of their anxiety, and they passed it on to me. So now I deal with these physical issues. So in other words, for some of you, heart palpitations might not even be an issue. It might be headaches, chronic headaches, or migraines, because I keep my anxiety so close to me up here in my mind. Perhaps that might be for thinkers. I don't know. There might be a connection there. But the important thing is I want to know how it affects me so I can combat it. Anxiety is a perpetuating state of unrest and unease. That if untreated, it will cause serious complications and disrupt our daily life. So this is where we begin to see, if I don't learn how to manage my anxiety, or I should say manage anxiety when it oppresses me, then it will turn into a daily struggle for me until I learn how to release it mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, first and foremost, actually. Because we need to release whatever is causing me to feel anxious and putting me in the state of depression or anger. Sadness or anger is the better description, sadness or anger. When I know what triggers me and what makes me feel anxious, then I can learn to implement ways to help me combat it. But if I don't know, then I'm at a disadvantage. So that's the first key, is to know, why do I get anxious? For some of us, we are carrying trauma that we don't even realize we're carrying. And as I said, it's on autopilot. Somebody says something, somebody does something to me, and it triggers me, and I respond and I react in anger, or I respond and I react by withdrawing and turning inward and feeling depressed. So if you're there in a place where you just, you just react, and all you can say is, well, they said something or they did something, then you may need to dig a little deeper and figure out what's causing that, what's causing you to feel that way or to react that way. Because there is always something behind the pain. There's always a root to why I feel this way or why I think this way, and certainly why I react this way. But we already have some amazing tools by understanding that I will typically go one way or the other and often vacillate between the two. But when I begin to uncover and discover what broke me, and why I tend to get this way, then I can learn to start releasing my anxiety little by little, step by step. And let me tell you, even once you're there and you know, okay, I tend to get like this because this happened to me, it's still a process, and it's still challenging, because you have to also learn how to treat, I hope this makes sense, but how to treat the emotional damage that flares up as a response to the trigger that comes at you. Okay? And another thing to remember here is a lot of times we trigger ourselves without even realizing it. Especially if you're in a state where you are trying to let stuff go. So again, this is why I prefaced earlier in saying that patience is such a key gold key to our recovery. Patience for self and patience for others. Because when I remember, okay, I'm not the only one who's going through something. My loved ones are going through something. And I need to remember that I can be patient toward them, and hopefully they'll be patient toward me. But I definitely need to learn how to be patient with myself so that I can get through whatever I'm dealing with and whatever I need to get through to get better. That's a whole teaching right there. Patience. Patience with self in your recovery. So, I'm going to give us some tools. How to combat this awful state of existence, anxiety. Again, it's such a broad topic because anxiety is a force that comes against us. It's an oppressive force that comes against us. And at the same time, because it can come from the outside through the spirit of fear, at the same time, it is an alarm system that helps us to acknowledge something is wrong. Okay, something's broken, something's hurting, something needs rescue. So that's first and foremost, is to distinguish, okay, am I feeling anxious because it's coming out here? Or am I feeling anxious because it's something within that needs to be addressed? Again, process. And this is the process, the inner healing process is, as I teach my 3 to 5 signature step process, is to acknowledge, to accept and embrace, to go through the process, to release and receive. Release the pain, receive the healing. So if you are someone who suffers with anxiety, I lament with you, because it is a very difficult state of existence for yourself and for those around you. But I can assure you that if you take the time to understand yourself a little bit more and have the courage to feel those uncomfortable feelings, if only to see what they are and where they're coming from, you will have so much victory just in those 2 steps. Now, a lot of times I will say, there are different seasons when you battle with anxiety, and there are different stages, as I said. But the hope is you can get to the place where you're ready to face what's making me anxious. So I don't have to be afraid anymore of what's making me anxious. Anxiety also comes with the releasing part of the inner healing journey, because it's uncomfortable to release pain, and yet it's the only way to be free. So if you're on this journey too, having anxiety during this process is part of the process. So be patient with yourself. Let me give you a few tips to combat anxiety as a state. Okay, the first is this. And this is fundamental. We must acknowledge that anxiety is rooted in fear. and it is a gauge to our present spiritual, mental, and emotional state. Like I said, it's an alarm system. And yet, it is rooted in the spirit of fear. So I need to discern, where am I at right now? Is it me? Or is it out here that's coming at me and oppressing me? Number 2, we must know which direction anxiety tends to take us. As I shared earlier, the heights of anger or the depths of depression. Where do you tend to go? Knowing this will posture you to manage anxiety when it attacks. And that's a good thing to remember. Anxiety attacks. It attacks. That's why it's called anxiety attack. Because it's like an onslaught at you, mentally, emotionally, and physically. It's overwhelming, it's oppressive, and it's almost many times you don't have time to even acknowledge that it's happening because you're already in it. So, and this is why, again, our default mode, and by the way, our default mode to how we respond to anxiety is rooted in our trauma. It's rooted in our trauma. So if I tend to attack when I'm anxious and I get angry at people and I'm short, it's rooted in my trauma. Something happened to me that makes me feel like I have to defend myself because I feel anxious. In the same way, when I feel anxious, I internalize my anxiety and I keep it to myself and I get depressed, it's rooted in my trauma. Something happened to me that makes me feel like I can't speak up, I can't say anything, I have to keep this to myself and just carry this burden by myself. Nobody's going to help me. It's a state of helplessness, and then it's a state of helplessness in my depression, and the outward is a state of pride. Okay, it's a state of saying, nobody's competent to help me. So I have to yell and I have to kick and I have to scream to let everybody know that I'm anxious and upset. Both of them are rooted in our traumas. So again, coming to this, what happened to me that makes me like this is paramount. Number 3, we must know the roots of our brokenness. Much of the time, anxiety is something we've carried for much longer than we may realize. What I just shared, again, trauma from our past. Things that trigger the memory will provoke anxiety within me, seemingly out of nowhere at times. And this is where learning how to take the inner healing journey is a major benefit to our overall being. Again, I share this all the time in one-to-one sessions and in group classes like this one. Getting on this inner healing journey is life-changing because you're taking your power back and helping yourself recover from whatever you've been through or whatever you're going through. We all, this is number 4. We must address our anxious coping mechanisms and learn how to adjust them in a healing way. Again, process and patience. Even when you understand how I cope with my anxiety, you still are in the process of doing it well, right? Because it's a process. So, for example, if I cope with my anxiety by, let's say, smoking. Okay, I'm going to give you this example because it's something that I used to smoke a lot. I was addicted to cigarettes and nicotine for many years. And that was a season of my life where, and I would say this was a season where I didn't even realize that I was hiding behind my addiction of cigarettes to deal with my issues, my inner issues. but it's still part of my healing process. Battling addiction of any kind is still part of your recovery process. Okay? So getting to that point of, actually, this is victory. When you get to the point where you say, okay, you know what, I'm doing this to cope with my anxiety. Even if you recognize, because I knew smoking was bad for me. You know, most people know that. It's bad for you. And at the same time, that's where I was at, so that I could manage the anxiety internally. For me, it was internally. But when I got to the point where I realized smoking is actually leading me down darker paths, and I feel like I'm gonna get lost completely in all of this if I don't get out, I had to come to a point of surrendering that coping mechanism that was actually keeping me stuck in a perpetual state of brokenness that wouldn't let me heal. So a lot of people who are in recovery from addiction, they're waking up to this realization as well. I'm actually learning that my addiction is part of the problem. It's not the problem, it's part of the problem that's underneath. So when I get a grip on my recovery with addiction, for example, and this can be any kind of addiction, then I'm already getting out to getting closer to why do I have so much anxiety. Okay? So addressing the coping mechanisms and learning how to adjust in a healing way. Okay? And this is why it's very important, and I say this a lot, that wherever you are in your recovery stage, embrace it and be patient with yourself, because nobody else is going to show you the same patience, and you need to learn that for yourself so you can get out and heal. Let's see. So I'm just going to read this actually, because it just sort of echoes what I just said. But we all have coping mechanisms to keep us alive. Again, this is part of that innate survival mode that we find ourselves in innately, because God gave us that internal alarm system that when I feel a lack of peace, I'm going into survival mode so I can stay alive. But what we want to remember, again, it's a natural instinct, but what we want to remember is I don't want to live in this state of alarm. I don't want to live in a perpetual fight or flight all the time, because that's going to wreck my health. Not to mention, you know, it robs our peace of mind. It robs our emotional stability, which, by the way, again, going back to this understanding that some of us are thinkers and some of us are feelers, when we are wrestling with anxiety, if I'm a feeler, for example, which I am, actually I'm a feeler, my anxiety is going to be off the charts emotionally for me. If you're a thinker and you wrestle with anxiety, when I say wrestle with anxiety, because we all have anxiety, but when you're in a state of perpetual anxiety, like it's daily, like I'm always anxious state, and you're a thinker, it's going to wreak havoc on your mind and in your thought life. So this is why, again, when I know, you know what, I process everything through my emotions, or I process everything through my thoughts. This gives you the upper hand to know that when I feel those racing thoughts and I can't get a grip on what I'm thinking, and I'm starting to think all kinds of things that I know I shouldn't be thinking, that's when you need to remember, okay, what's the truth, and what lie am I believing that's keeping me away from that truth, so I can renew my mind. If you're a thinker, if you're a feeler, for me, again, for example, I need to come to this place where I'm like, okay, what happened that is making me feel overwhelmed emotionally and I can't regulate myself? Now, in my case, I do know where mine comes from, and it's because of trauma. So I'm still learning emotional regulation on a daily basis when I'm triggered. I still need to learn when I'm triggered, because I already know for me it's emotions. I need to implement and I'm going to get into this in a second, but to implement healthy coping mechanisms and a strategy to help me come back to that homeostasis so that I can quell my anxiety and then deal with the underlying issue. Because again, there's always an underlying issue, whether it's coming from outside or coming from within. Okay, so this is important because, and many of us are old enough actually to be in this position, but because we've developed negative coping mechanisms for a long time, it will take time to replace them with the positive, healthy coping mechanisms. But it doesn't happen by osmosis. We have to be proactive in our recovery. So this is why being self-aware and knowing, you know what, I deal with this issue. You know what, I struggle with this. But I can learn how to correct it and get myself on that healthier path by implementing strategies. Okay? Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to share some of these strategies and remedies with you. I've shared them before. But again, because anxiety is all-encompassing, it affects us spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically, it's important for us to address it in every area of life. So I have to have a physical way to cope with it. I have to have a mental way to cope with it. I have to have an emotional way to cope with it. And I definitely have to have a spiritual way to cope with it if I'm going to combat it and conquer it. Okay? Now, the first is breathing, which we tend to forget is so powerful. And I definitely forget to just breathe. Just breathe. My husband reminds me often, just breathe. And sometimes we need those reminders from the people closest to us who, again, I shared this before, but knowing what you struggle with and sharing it is important so that your loved ones can also help you on your recovery. But breathing is so important. Now, what I'll share about breathing is something very, very basic, and it is 3 deep breaths. In through the nose, out through the mouth, very slowly. That resets you, and I cannot explain it. I don't understand it myself. Again, this is just one of those internal clocks that I think God gave us to remember that the very source of breath and life is what gives us life. So it's the easiest way to calm down. Whether you are someone who projects your anxiety and gets angry, or you're someone who internalizes it and gets depressed, breathe. Number 2, stretching. Stretching of any kind is very therapeutic obviously for your body. But again, because anxiety gets trapped, especially if it's rooted in trauma and it's actually just flaring up, as I mentioned before, a lot of times I'm in a state of anxiety because I haven't dealt with some trauma, and so it just flares up and comes out. When I can learn to release it physically, that is the full circle, actually. We want to release anxiety mentally. Obviously, a good way to do this would be journaling our thoughts and just kind of getting that mental clutter out by just, I call it a 5-minute journal. This is what I teach in my 1-to-1 sessions, is a 5-minute journal of just uninterrupted conscious stream of consciousness, writing whatever I'm thinking. It releases my mind from the pressure of all that's going on up there. Okay? Emotionally, I need to release it as well. Um, this is where, this is actually where the crux of this whole process is, because in our emotional realm is typically where the trauma gets stored, in the subconscious part of the mind and in the emotional limbic system. So talk therapy is amazing and it's wonderful, and it helps us to verbalize what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. But if we want to go deeper, then we need to go deeper through other mediums, and this is what I'm going to get into now. The mediums of art and music therapy are so important to connect with this part of self that is hurting and broken. Again, why? Because I need to activate that part of self that has trapped those parts of me that resurrect in anxiety within. Now I'm speaking specifically with anxiety that's been internalized. Anxiety that comes from outside is a different approach. It's a different kind of strategy. And for that, I would say, to learn your triggers, to learn what upsets you, and then to learn how to combat it by having that knowledge of where you've come from and what broke you. So music unlocks muscle memory. There's so much I could say about music. In fact, I am going to share on music therapy very soon. I actually did a video several years ago on this process that I plan on teaching, and probably going to do a workshop at some point. I can't tell you when, but it's on the horizon. But it unlocks muscle memory. It's powerful. I don't know how to even describe it, because again, I feel like music is just one of those gifts from God to help us heal. Whether we're receiving it from somebody else who poured into their work, or whether we're creating it, it's the same healing balm. And then art, of course, and there's so many types of art that we could get into. But again, because it is activating the part of the mind, the subconscious, and the emotional realm where we've been broken, it allows us to open up to release the pain through these mediums. And this is why I do what I do. This is why I'm so passionate about it. And I want to share it with you. So I hope that this has blessed you. I hope that your anxiety by the end of this month will be lessened. And I hope that you'll take some of these tips that I've shared, and some of this knowledge that I've accumulated simply by going through it myself, and I'm still going through it. But I want to encourage all of us to remember to be patient with your process, and be patient with the process of those you love, because we're all recovering from something. So this is number 1 in our recovery series, anxiety, perfect place to start. And I will be back soon. If you're interested in sharing any topics or subjects that you want to get into, I would be happy to take your feedback and do some studies for us. So let me know. Of course, if you're interested in the one-to-one sessions, I am completely free in the afternoons right now, and I would love to help you go through this journey. That's it for now. I hope you all are doing well. Love you so much, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.